All right, so strap in because today we're diving deep into the case of Randall Woodfield, the I-5 killer. And I gotta say, these excerpts from his Wikipedia page that you sent me, man, what a story.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Definitely fascinating. And yeah, I mean, really shows you how appearances can be deceiving, huh?
It really does. I mean, we're gonna try to unpack who this guy was, what he did, what his crimes were like, and, well, maybe we can even try to get inside the mind of a killer, right?
Yeah, let's do it. Sounds like a plan. Where should we start?
Well, the first thing that really jumped out at me was how normal his early life seemed. I mean, good family, star athlete. He even got drafted by the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah.
Like, how do you go from that to,
Right. That's something you see a lot with serial killers.
Mhm.
This ability to blend in. They can be really charming, almost like wearing a mask. But underneath, well, there's a whole lot of darkness.
Yeah, no kidding. And the thing is, those cracks in the mask, they were there pretty early on. The Wikipedia article mentions him exposing himself, going all the way back to junior high.
Yeah, and those early signs, right? Especially with this picture-perfect life he had, it's really significant. It kind of shows this struggle, this inability to control these, well, urges. And that was there way before the murders even started.
So you're saying this wasn't like a sudden snap. It was already there. This darkness.
Exactly. And even with all that, his football career, it just kept going. I mean, the guy was obviously talented, right?
Yeah.
Drafted by the Packers in '74. That's huge.
It makes you think though. Did that success, did it maybe, I don't know, delay things? Like could he channel all that uh darkness into the game? All that aggression?
Maybe. It's possible. I mean, the structure of football, the intensity, maybe it was like an outlet, right? A way to sublimate those urges. But like we know, the NFL thing, it didn't last.
Right. The article says he got cut from the Packers during training camp. And it was after a bunch of indecent exposure arrests. Man, that must have been devastating for him.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, rejection, failure, especially for someone like him, maybe with a fragile ego, that can be a trigger, big time.
Hmm.
A lot of rage and resentment can come from that, especially with people who are, well, predisposed to violence.
And it seems like that's when things really went south. He goes back to Portland, and the article mentions all these robberies and sexual assault. And they were getting worse, more violent. And, well, it all ends up with him in prison in 1975.
And that's where things get really creepy. While he's in prison, he starts writing to Cherie Lynn Ayers, a classmate from back in the day. And she ends up being his first confirmed murder victim in 1980.
That's so messed up. A woman he knew, someone he was like writing letters to while he was locked up. It's almost like he betrayed her trust.
It's definitely an escalation. I mean,
Wow.
from robbery and assault to murder. And that connection, to someone from his past, it's really important. It shows how detached he was becoming, how little he cared about human life. And that's a dangerous shift.
And that's when, well, the I-5 killer really comes out, I guess. He goes on
Right.
this spree targeting women all along the
The,
I-5.
the double murder, Darcy Fix and Douglas Altig,
Yeah.
that one really stands out. Just brutal, like an execution. And then all the robberies and assaults
Yeah.
and murders spanning, I mean, multiple states. He even started using disguises,
Yeah.
like a fake beard and athletic tape on his nose.
Wow. It's like he enjoyed the fear he was causing, like he was getting more confident that he could get away with it.
And you can see that in how often he was attacking it. It's typical, I guess, for a serial killer who's losing control. The urges get stronger, and the need to act, it gets more urgent. Like he's heading for a breaking point.
But even with all that going on, I mean, he was still trying to have a normal life, right? The article even mentions him planning a Valentine's Day party.
Yeah, and no one showed up. And I mean, can you imagine all that rejection on top of everything else? That could have been it, the final straw. And that same night, he murders Julie Wrights, someone else he knew.
It's just tragic how things like that, things that seem so random, can have such a big impact, especially on someone like Woodfield, someone so unstable.
Yeah. And it shows how unpredictable he was. That mix of impulsiveness and planning makes it really hard to figure out why he did what he did.
And in the end, that's what leads to his capture, right? Years and years of police work, witness statements, they find evidence in his apartment, and that's finally the end of his reign of terror.
It's amazing how it all came together. The police were able to put him at different crime scenes, connect him to specific times, using things like, phone records. It's like something out of a detective novel.
And then there's Beth Wilmot. She survived his attack. And her testimony was huge. It helped convict him for the murder of Sherry Hull.
Absolutely. I mean, to go through something that awful and then to face him in court, to help put him away, that takes so much strength.
Yeah, it's incredible. It really shows how strong people can be.
And her testimony, with all the other evidence, I mean, it really showed what Woodfield was, this dangerous predator.
Yeah.
The prosecutor even called him the coldest, most detached defendant he'd ever seen.
Man, that's chilling. To think that someone could be that cruel, that they could, like, function in society, fill everyone around them, it's scary.
Yeah, it really shows you the dark side of, psychopathy, that ability to shut off empathy, to not feel any remorse. It's a reminder that, well, evil can look like anyone.
And even after he's locked up, he's still causing problems. The article says he gets charged with sodomy and weapons charges, and he even sued Ann Rule, the author of the I-5 killer, for libel.
Talk about irony, huh? He tries to control the story, to silence the people who are, trying to tell the truth. And it just brings more attention to the case.
It's like he was desperate to be in control again. I mean, his life was totally out of control.
And here's the really messed up part. The crimes they convicted him for, that might just be the tip of the iceberg. The article says he could be connected to as many as 44 murders.
That's insane. All those lives he affected, all those families, it's heartbreaking.
There's this quote from Detective Jim Lawrence. He said, he was like the boogeyman. And that really captures it, the fear that Woodfield caused, like a shadow hanging over everything.
So let's talk about the victims. The article describes most of them as young, thin, white women. Often they worked at businesses along the I-5.
Right. And that tells us a few things. First, there's the opportunity. These women were often working alone or in places where they were vulnerable. Easy targets.
Yeah. And the article mentions how he'd often approached them while they were working.
Exactly. But that they all fit a certain type, that suggests something deeper. Like there was something specific about those kinds of women that Woodfield was drawn to. Like it was all part of some dark fantasy in his head. It's almost like, who the victim was, it didn't really matter. Like the important thing was the act itself, the power.
Yeah.
And these women, they just became, well, the way he got that power.
That's a pretty scary thought. And the thing is, it wasn't always strangers he targeted. Sometimes it was people he actually knew.
Yeah, that's right. It's like a mix, of him just acting on impulse and also planning things out. He could grab an opportunity, but he could also stalk people.
So it's complicated, huh? All these different sides to him. It makes it hard to figure out, like, what was his motivation? Was it getting cut from the Packers? Or was it, these urges he had that he couldn't control? Or maybe it was all about his ego.
It was probably all of it,
Yeah.
like all this darkness inside him, and it all just came together. It really makes you think about how important it is to deal with the root causes of this kind of violence.
Absolutely. So what can we learn about what was going on in his head from the stuff you sent? The article mentions some quotes from his prison letters.
Oh, yeah. Those letters, they're disturbing, man. You can
Yeah.
see how manipulative he was.
Yeah.
And he shows zero remorse. He's more worried about people feeling sorry for him than, taking responsibility.
And Detective Lawrence and Ann Rule, they both said that Woodfield was, like, totally egotistical. He couldn't admit when he was wrong. And he had all this rage, especially towards women.
That's like he wanted to be so successful,
Yeah.
especially in football, right?
Yeah.
That whole macho world. And when he didn't get there, it twisted him up inside. He needed to control people. And women, especially the ones who, rejected him, they got the worst of it.
Man, that's heavy. It just shows how dangerous it is when someone's ego is out of control and they feel like they're entitled to everything. It can lead to some really bad stuff.
Here's something that'll really freak you out. Detective Lawrence said that if Woodfield hadn't been caught, he thinks he would have been killing, like, every few days.
That is terrifying. It's like, wow, like he was getting addicted to it, to the power he felt when he took a life. And that's what happens with a lot of serial killers, right? It just gets worse and worse. It makes you realize how important it is to stop it early, to get help for people. Okay, so we've talked about Woodfield's past, all those awful things he did, and we've tried to, like, get inside his head, but what does it all mean? What's the takeaway from all this?
I think, Woodfield's case is a huge wake-up call. It shows us that evil can be hiding anywhere. It doesn't always look, like a monster. Woodfield, on the surface, he was good-looking, athletic, he had a good family, but underneath it all, he was a monster.
It's scary to think that anyone could be like that, even people we know. It makes you question, like, what people are really like, It reminds you that evil can be anywhere.
And that's why we got to be careful. We got to pay attention to the warning signs, even the little ones. Like, Woodfield exposing himself when he was a kid. He couldn't control himself. Those are signs, but no one really noticed, or they didn't do anything about it.
So what can we do? How do we protect ourselves, our
Mhm.
families? I mean, from people like Woodfield.
It starts with knowing what to look for. We got to understand how predators act, teach our kids about boundaries, and make it so that victims feel safe talking about it,
Hmm.
so they can report abuse without feeling ashamed or scared.
It's about being open, talking about these things, creating a safe space
Mm,
in our families, our communities, and we got to look out for each other.
exactly. We all got to do our part. If we see something that seems off, we got to say something.
Yeah.
And we got to support the people who've been hurt. That's how we create a safer world.
This deep dive has been, well, intense. Randall Woodfield's story, it's sad and disturbing, but it also shows us how important it is to be aware, to educate ourselves, and to do something.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface here, but I hope you've learned something from it.
Thanks for listening. And remember if any of this has, hit home for you or if you have questions, well, you're not alone. Okay. There's help out there, people who want to help.
That's so true. And in this case, it brings up a really important point.
Mm.
We talk a lot about catching these guys, and that's important, obviously. But what about stopping it before it even starts?
Yeah, that's a huge question. Like, where do you even begin with something like that?
Well, a lot of experts think that catching things early is key. Like recognizing those warning signs we talked about,
Mm.
not just brushing them off like, oh, boys will be boys, or it's just a phase.
So being more aware, like as parents, teachers, just people in the community.
Exactly. And it's not about like turning everyone into some kind of, expert. It's about making it okay to talk about this stuff, making it okay to ask for help.
Yeah, that makes sense. So instead of just, reacting to these horrible things, we try to prevent them. We focus on support.
Right. And it's not just about protecting the victims, it's about helping the potential offenders too,
Mhm.
dealing with those underlying problems, the anger, that sense of entitlement before it turns into something really bad.
It's a tough issue, for sure. But this deep dive, it's really shown how important it is to talk about it. We can't just pretend it's not there.
No, we can't. And the more we learn about why this kind of violence happens, the better we can deal with it.
Woodfield's case, it's a scary reminder that evil can be hiding anywhere, but it's also a call to action. It reminds us that we all have to do our part. We have to be aware, we have to learn, and we have to work together to make the world a safer place.
Yeah. We've only just scratched the surface of this case. It's a complex one, but hopefully it's giving you some things to think about.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, knowledge is power. And by talking about these things, by bringing them into the light, well, maybe we can actually start to make a difference.